Also very fortunate to be a board member for AEC Trendsetters. On behalf of the entire AEC Trendsetters board, we've got a lot of our board members on the call tonight too. Just want to thank everybody for being here. For those of you who aren't familiar with our group, we're an industry organization dedicated to really just bringing together architects, engineers, and contractors, finding ways to provide networking opportunities, professional development, and really just bring together the industry to kind of support one another. So appreciate you being here this evening. If anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about Trendsetters, please feel free to reach out to myself, any of the board members, send a little note in the chat box, and we'd be happy to connect with you. We're always looking for new members and also different ways that we can kind of connect as an industry. So switching gears to tonight's event, tonight is all about COVID, which I feel like we've all been hearing about and living for a long time this year. It's been an interesting year, but we wanted to bring together some industry professionals to get perspectives on how COVID is really impacting design and the construction industry. So tonight we're very fortunate to have some great speakers kind of representing different market sectors. And to start out, we just wanted to give each speaker an opportunity to kind of introduce themselves. And after that, we'll get into some of the presentations. So to start with, if I could have each of our speakers just give a quick introduction, and we'll go in order on the slide here, that would be fantastic.
First, start. Jeff Collins, Collins Development Company, real estate developers since 1991.
I'm with Stephen Esprinio, SA Hospitality Enterprises, specializing in hospitality concept development, particularly food and beverage, and collaborating with Mr. Collins over here on a number of projects, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Thank you for inviting me. My name is Gustavo Berenblum. I'm a principal and co-founder of Berenblum Bush Architects. We are based in Miami with projects worldwide, and I'll give you some feedback later on. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm a project executive for Suffolk Construction. Thank you for having me tonight.
Hello, I'm Robert Curto. I'm with Stephen Boroff Architects and Planners, Inc. I've been with the firm since 1996. Been really fortunate to be involved in a wide range of projects as part of that practice.
Hi, I'm Kelly Sho, from owner of the Wesley Group, who's a contract project management firm based here in West Palm Beach.
Hello, my name is Brittany Farron. I'm a registered architect and interior designer with PGL. We're a national firm with over 75 years of experience in architecture, interior design, planning, and engineering, and our local offices here in Boca.
Great. Thank you all again for being here tonight. We definitely appreciate the time. So for our attendees, you should see the chat box function on your Zoom setup. If you guys have any questions throughout the presentations, please feel free to enter your questions into that chat function. We're going to try and field a few questions as we go, but then we'll also, if time allows, at the end of the program, circle back to some additional questions. So what we're going to do is have each of our presenters provide about 10 minutes of presentation content, and then at the end of each session, we'll do some of the Q&A as I mentioned. So with that, Jeff and Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Super, thank you very much. So we are developers, and we've started in 1991 in our own company. And Steve and I have collaborated on several projects. A couple of them have been recently hit by the COVID this year. One especially is a 4 food and beverage venue on the water up in Jupiter, which we'll get more into.
Yes, and we'll be talking a little bit about kind of our collaboration between development and hospitality, with Jeff specializing on the development side, myself with hospitality, and kind of our approach specifically as it kind of relates to COVID-19 and taking more of a proactive approach with hospitality and development as opposed to a reactive as we're kind of going through everything with the consequent development, with these projects that we'll be talking a little bit about, primarily Love Street. So. Which is the one that Jeff mentioned that'll be on the water here. So Jeff and I have a little bit of experience working with one another. It's kind of been a strategic partnership for a number of years at this point. We started with 1000 North in Jupiter, which was a project done with Michael Jordan and Ernie Els and a number of other people here right on the water, about 10,000 square foot restaurant and private club, fine dining, different kind of elements to the whole guest experience, multiple floors, et cetera. And that was a multi-year project for both Jeff and I. We launched back in 2015, 16. Yeah. So a few years ago. And then that kind of led to us kind of further developing in the local area of Jupiter. Jeff then did Pelican Club, which you can talk a little bit about.
So the Pelican Club was a 22,000 square foot restaurant on the water in Jupiter, which we converted into, we did an adaptive reuse into a 22,000 square foot event venue. So popular in Jupiter that when they opened in April of 19, they had 86 weddings on the books the day they opened. And within 6 months, they were completely booked for 2 years, except for like Tuesday and Wednesday nights. And then they got hit by COVID, both the tenants actually in New York, and then here they got hit by COVID and they've hardly had any events for about 8 months. And then they've just started events here in about 2 or 3 weeks ago again, and smaller events like 50 and 100 person weddings versus the 400 and 500 person weddings they were doing 2 or 3 a week of. So they're just starting to get back into it. And then a client of ours bought the property now known as Love Street, which is a 2-acre property, and Steve and I have collaborated. So I went back to Steve and we put the team back together, and we'll get into it, but there's 4 food and beverage venues on a 2-acre parcel, which also has future build out for retail, which we'll get into in the future.
Great. Next slide, please. So COVID-19, obviously the kind of subject matter for this presentation with all the different presenters, and that's kind of been affecting obviously all certain types of development in different ways, especially on the hospitality side. Again, going back to what I was mentioning before of kind of taking a proactive approach instead of reactive. We are actually in a beneficial position right now, specifically with Love Street, because we're able to kind of pivot and tweak certain things because we're still, just gearing up for our launch, which will be coming up in the next couple months, which we're very excited about. But we've been able to kind of go back and based on different mandates and protocols from whether federal or state, local here in the Jupiter municipality, and working in things on the operational side as well as on the developmental side, kind of planning for the future, because I think, as we all know, COVID-19 is not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think we have to look to the future, especially as it relates to dining, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So Love Street, Jeff will go into a little bit about kind of the overall scope of it, and then we'll kind of dig down a little bit more on the granular level as far as how we're kind of approaching everything related to COVID-19.
Right. So Love Street, a 2-acre parcel. It took about 5 years to get approvals. We were actually originally scheduled to open towards the first quarter of this year. And for various reasons, we delayed it. It's one of those things, sometimes it's better to get lucky than, be good and get lucky than good. Because we had hired all the employees in about March, we would have had to let them all go in April. And so we were pretty happy we didn't hire the 180 employees we were looking for. And instead, we made some changes to the project. We made it better. We have a lot of plaza areas, so we're able to put a lot of chairs outside, do social distancing. So unlike a lot of the neighbors have it, but some of them don't, but we are lucky enough to have a lot of open area that's not our parking lot. It's actually open area on the plaza, on the water. So we can fit about an extra 60 seats out there. So it helps a lot. But it's about 23,000 square feet in total. There's about 10 of it's about future retail, which I don't know if we'll ever build. There's a 13 marina slips, which we actually have our own commercial fishermen at the slips. So we actually have a seafood market, which is one of the 4 venues. And with the commercial fishermen, we actually will buy the fish from them, clean it right there. So it's truly right from the fisherman to your table that we'll be selling the fish. And the 4 food and beverages Steve can get into, and he jumped to the next one. Go ahead.
So again, just now back to, on the hospitality side from what Jeff was saying, we got, very fortunate. And I think, everyone, all the panelists are going through this right now, and a number of, the participants as well. Like, what do we do? How do we plan for the future? And yeah, we did get very lucky. I mean, furloughing 180 just line level employees, not including 20 plus management team members. So over 200 individuals. We kind of was like a blessing in disguise with, as we all know, when construction delays come up, for whatever reason that they may be, it actually worked out to our benefit. And again, we were able to kind of plan and everything. So, but as far as kind of the progression as it's gone through, Jeff kind of touched on that as far as starting in 2016 and then groundbreaking.
This is a project that I got involved in March of 13, and it took us till about June of 16 to get actual entitlements to even develop the project. And then we went through some changes to the entitlements, and the partnerships got put together. And then we started breaking ground around late October 18, around that area for clearing, et cetera. And it's taken a couple of years to build. And we've actually been hit during construction like everybody else has during COVID also. It's all the way down to the latest as of this week. The guy that's powder coating the railings for our rooftop bar, they could not get the powder coating from up north, so they're a week and a half late. because they couldn't get the powder coating. So it's gone all the way down to the subcontractor level, as we've all experienced. But we're hoping here to now get our TCO in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then to go through training and family and friends and open up. And the COVID-19, we've been able to make a lot of proactive moves there, both the outdoor seating, and Steve will get into here about on the operational side. We followed the FRLA, as well as the Chamber of Commerce came out with a position up in North County. And then now, of course, the town of Jupiter finally came out just a couple of weeks ago with a resolution allowing additional outdoor seating due to COVID. And so we've been able to keep in step with all those folks, and as well actually kind of push it along, quite honestly, to try to get those approvals done.
Correct. Yeah, and I'm sure everyone else is hopefully experiencing the same thing. But with the local municipality of Town of Jupiter here, as I know down in West Palm Beach and further south in Southern Palm Beach County down to Miami, the local governments have been like just really fantastic. As we know, that's not always the case depending on where you're located within the country. But they've been nothing but really helpful and kind of
Right.
reaching out to us and stuff. So as far as any participants listening, don't as if there's ever like intrepidation of possibly going to your local municipality because you don't want to rustle feathers or anything like that, they've actually been doing the opposite. So I think they've actually stepped up as almost like a partner for development, as opposed to they're doing their job, of course, in life safety and everything else, and all permitting obviously needs to fall in place. But again, they've really done a 180 as far as what's been going on, say 2-3 years ago compared to now with COVID-19.
Trying to help out. And Steve, get a little bit into on the operational side. Steve put together a very thorough logistics and operations book for new protocols and how to deal with all the staff, as well as the separation of tables, et cetera.
Yeah, so we went through a major, intensive, comprehensive period where we kind of did a level of analytics, and we put together about a 75-page action plan for operations, as well as it relates to development, and from the development handoff to operations. So, it goes a little bit more beyond just, wearing masks and wearing gloves. We've been looking into, again, because we're in the development period right now, looking into partitioning, but partitioning where it doesn't impede on the guest experience. People come out to dine, and they kind of look to us, especially in insane times like these, to escape reality and have a good time. And if you have basically put them in a plastic bubble, that's not going to really aid in what we're ultimately trying to do. So there's been a lot of like pivoting and planning as far as how we kind of balance COVID-19 friendly dining with obviously with an amazing dining experience, just not only from the food and beverage side, but on the service side specifically. Whether you're sitting at a bar and there's obviously X amount of feet between you and the bartender, and we want people to feel safe. We have a chef's counter where the guests will be sitting, and literally, and they'll be viewing right in the middle of the kitchen, which is pretty wild. But we planned that obviously pre-COVID-19, and now we're looking to put together precautionary measures that will still let people enjoy the show, the theater, if you will, but also feel comfortable and everything. So that's something that we've been kind of going into, and it extends obviously beyond just our internal staff, of course, too. I mean, while our protocol is set that when a vendor comes to the property, the temperature is taken, any like a little sign off and questionnaire just to make sure that we have paper trails. So we have to be very, very, very diligent, because as we all know, if one thing kind of goes wrong and all these protocols and mandates that we're putting in place, if anything ends up kind of going in a different direction, all of a sudden we're putting 200 plus employees livelihoods at stake. So we're definitely gone over and beyond, and again, not exaggerating, like literally a 75-page protocol doc just the management team and the line level employees can follow that, and again ultimately make our guests comfortable, but also for the safety of our personnel, because without them we can't do any of this, of course.
And on the construction side, when it got bad in the middle of summer, we had already started implementing, which is good, but the town actually came out and wanted a COVID action plan for the construction site. And we had to put something together with the contractor, but luckily we were already 90% there. So all the subcontractors on site had to wear masks, only so many guys. I mean, imagine limiting your construction site that now you can only have, 4 electricians working at the same time and things like that. And you have 4 different venues you're trying to get done. So it caused delays, like I said, on every level. The human resources staffing, I'll just touch on real quick. There's a job fair going on this week, and we've had a couple interviews, and even there it's tough. Believe it or not, it's tough to find employees right now. I think so many people are still scared of COVID. And I think this is scared, and Steve will speak more of this, but people I've actually, I think some people actually gotten scared of the restaurant industry and left the restaurant industry for other industries because they feel so unstable now with what's going on. So we actually, I've been trying to find 200 employees in the past couple of weeks, and we're down to needing only about 50 now, but we're surprised we're even having a little challenge finding those 50.
Correct. I mean, the industry has become very volatile, and as far as what Jeff was mentioning about people kind of taking, I don't know, say lower risk and going into different industries, is that we've definitely seen that impact. And we're talking about, high level hospitality professionals and fine dining and all the way down to fast casual and everything in between. And if you have a family at home, and obviously knowing the volatility of the hospitality industry right now, specifically with restaurants, there's definitely it's caused its issues, but we've also turned these issues into opportunities now, knowing what kind of level of human capital is left in the market. We're able to target these individuals through kind of an outreach program. Yes, Jeff mentioned a job fair, but also a number of other resources, not just online, but kind of doing a more kind of one-on-one contacts, whether it's through LinkedIn or whatever it may be, and we're getting a great response. It's just, as Jeff mentioned, that last, call it 30-40% of the people that we need, we're just kind of not struggling, but taking a little extra time to get there. So that's been kind of one thing on the operations side that obviously is a major thing, because again, without your team, we can do all the amazing things that we all do with all the panelists here from architecture and design and development, but obviously without the team, it definitely falls short. So we're putting all efforts into that.
I was going to say about updating pro forma on the last slide. I was going to make the joke and say, what pro forma? We're in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, truthfully, some of it is pro forma driven, and some of it's how do you truthfully mitigate the extra cost of delays and still try to get the restaurant done. So it's a lot of mitigation of extra expenses and cost in the last 3 or 4 months versus just pro forma. We've made some very good value added decisions, such as buying extra chairs to the outside, extra tables to sit outside because we have a large plaza area. And so we've done a handful of things like that. But some of it truly is just, between the contractor and delays and the subcontractors. We had subcontractors who they said their people didn't even show up on site because they were making more money in unemployment, or for some other reason didn't even show up. So we had some challenges.
Yeah, it's definitely turned everything upside down in a sense where it's not impossible to get back on track, but again, taking those kind of considerations and we mentioned a few times, taking that proactive approach. So, whether it's like, okay, well, we know we're going to be at 50% seating or 75%. So expansion with outdoor areas, maximization of the interiors with those partitioning measures or whatever it may be, so we can maximize the revenue per square foot throughout each of the different venues that we've been working on. So it's been a challenge, but it's been a fun one, to be honest. So, but anyway,
but our tap house, we're keeping it the same price. Don't worry. We got 24 taps and we're keeping the prices where they are.
Yeah, that is one thing.
You can still come up and have a beer.
I guess we could have doubled the prices, I guess, but we didn't want to do that. So,
but real quick on the COVID accommodations and resolutions, the FRLA had come out with a kind of a set of their logistics and guidelines going back 3 or 4 months ago. And we certainly went through that. And that was in conjunction with the governor. And that's when they were just trying to figure out how to deal with this. And then the Palm Beach Chamber came out with a very good position of you should be allowing restaurants to put their seating outside. They came out with a very good paper, a position paper on it, which is good. And we follow that. And then, of course, the town of Jupiter, like I said, just recently in the last month, to put a resolution forth that they're allowing during this COVID period to have some of your seating outside. So we're certainly taking advantage of all those things and trying to work with all the agencies we can. And as well as our neighbors, we believe, all boats rise. So we're all trying to work together and make it work together for sure.
Correct. And we touched on the guest experience and the coordination with local municipalities before, kind of again in a very good way in regards to the latter. And as far as the former is concerned, this is not an excuse, and our guests, obviously they're going to still come out and with their hard-earned money, and we still got to blow them out of the water and everything. So yes, we have a number of challenges that we're kind of working up against, but we got to navigate them. And so far, it's been pretty amazing, and everybody's worked together. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is that everyone has come together to make it better for everyone, which again is just a pleasure to see, especially obviously in hospitality. That's a natural thing, but again, even with the different industries kind of coalescing to for something extraordinary with what we're doing. Again, we're very pleased and very lucky. So.
Sure. And I'll say something economically. It's interesting because, we know a lot of restaurateurs, and at least 4 or 5 of them in the last 2 weeks have told me that their revenue for last month was 30% over their revenue a year ago. So it's like so many people are now wanting to get out and go do things, from very casual restaurants to some fine dining. We know them all. And they're all like, our revenue last month was 30% higher than it was a year ago pre-COVID. So it's pretty interesting. Now they were doing bad for a period of months, but now it's like, seems like everybody wants to get out. So we'll see what happens here with this surge of COVID and the elections and everything else. We'll see what happens, but that's been happening last month for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you, listening here with us, and we're excited to listen with the next presenters and everything. And
but you got to come to our restaurants. We'll be open here in a couple of months. We have the Tap House and Raw Bar. We have the American Grill. We have the kind of tapas light menu only rooftop bar and restaurant in northern Palm Beach County. And then we actually have a seafood market, and we have our own fresh fish right there on site.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing everyone.
Place.
Awesome. Thank
Jeff,
you.
Jeff and Stephen, as a Jupiter resident, you can definitely count me in. I would love to stop by and see all the new spaces too once they're ready to go. And I'm a fan of the existing properties too. So thank you guys so much for being a part of today's program.
It's our pleasure, Rachel. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, so we didn't get any questions yet. Jeff and Stephen will let you know if we do see any come in for you guys. But in the interest of time, I think we'll move on and let Gustavo start his presentation. So Gustavo, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rachel, and I can't wait to try that seafood place, an open bar. So maybe we'll have another presentation following up this one over there in a couple of months. But let's move to the next slide. Like we said at the beginning, my name is Gustavo Berenblum. I'm principal of Berenblum Busch Architects, and we as a multidisciplinary firm based here in Miami, but we have projects worldwide. And perhaps one of the reasons why I'm invited to talk today, it's because we have a specialty of designing for the cruise industry. And we do projects for the big cruise lines around the world. And as you know, they have been the industry that has been most affected by COVID, which effectively closed in the US since mid-March, and it's still closed. So we as designers and architects, I will bring our perspective of how we're helping ports and the cruise lines think these things through and implement solutions in the short and in the long term. So let's go to the next one. So as architects and designers, I thought that it would be a good idea to pose some questions, questions that we have to face when we design spaces or retrofit for coming back, for starting operations again. And so very basic questions. We have only 10 minutes and I won't be able to address too much of each, but I wanted to give you a taste of the things that we think. And so the first question is, what are the protocols or the rules of the game? What are the things that we do in pre-design that we must consider in order to start thinking of new spaces that accommodate COVID or a pandemic? And some of these things that you see here on the slide are pretty obvious, right? By now, who would have said a year ago that we would be implementing social distance or controlling the occupant load on buildings and so forth? But by today, we are all accustomed to this. And like the previous presenters were mentioning, this is not going away and it's here to stay for the long run. So in cruise terminals, what we're doing is thinking of additional strategies, because in some countries, cruise operations have restarted, specifically in Italy and in Germany. The cruise have started with limited operations. And one thing they're doing is testing everybody in the building. Everybody, all the crew members, all the passengers, anybody that works for the cruise line that will be in that facility is tested before entering that physical building. And so that creates a condition that once you're in, you're sort of safe, right? And from then on, there's a control of what's happening in the ship and along the way on each one of the stays, whereby everybody that comes in contact with the passengers is tested and it's clear. So that's one strategy that we see that may be extending beyond the cruise. Obviously, it's not practical for many type of buildings because buildings are very porous and are people coming in and out all the time. But for certain specific cases, that might be something that cruise line is leading the way. Another strategy that they're using is pre-checking the passengers way before getting to the building. They're trying to minimize this physical contact. You know, this idea of handing a passport, somebody getting the passport, touching something and touching it again and then getting back to you. It's disappearing very fast. There are whole sort of devices that are being implemented in buildings that actually through scanning of the eyes and you know, electronic devices, and actually the uploading from your house your passport to a network and things like that, make it to the point that where when you arrive into some of these terminals, you're already clear. Next. So again, as designers now, apart from the protocols that dictate how we have to approach this, we also have to think how the space that we design performed during a pandemic, right? Because if we are retrofitting facilities or buildings, you know, there's a certain essence of the space, a certain quality, might be a restaurant, might be a hotel, it might be the cruise terminal that we want to respect. And if anything, we want to exalt that quality that the space have, as opposed to just putting boundaries left and right and degrading the quality, which is one of the reasons why they came to that space, the passengers, the guests, in the first place. So one of the things that we're seeing for those buildings that cannot be completely controlled in terms of occupants is that the design has to now accommodate a much more fluid movements through the space, right? We are trying to minimize bottlenecks. We are trying to minimize situations where the people gather in large groups in an uncontrolled fashion. So these are things that before we thought through in designing spaces that contain large quantity of occupants, but now it's taking to the next level, right? Now we are thinking really how to design a very fluid movement through a succession of spaces from point A to point B, so that nobody gets stuck and suddenly is in a situation that is surrounded by hundreds of people in the same space. Something else that has to be incorporated in some of the buildings is, and these have started in the cruise lines, in the cruise terminals, some facilities for testing, holding, and medical assistance. If you assume that everybody in the building has to be tested, then you have to have some sort of space to have that function being performed, and then holding those that might be you know, affected by the pandemic, and then as place really where they can be then taken home or to another facility. So that is something affecting our design. It's something that has to be retrofitting on existing buildings or considered for new buildings. That was not there before. And as designers, we're also thinking about controlling the entire sequence of events, from the moment that you drop off your car, where do you walk, how do you pass through the sequence of the spaces and moments, right, that have to be enjoyable until you get to the ship. And then when you debark from the ship until you get to your car and leave to go home. And this, again, I think the cruise industry is showing the way. Some of these things that I'm discussing in partial fashion are being instrumented or taking place in restaurants, in other types of buildings as well. Perhaps it's an extreme how the cruise lines is doing it, because they are the epicenter of this COVID-19, and they have been in the eye of the storm since early March. So they have to go way to the extreme to really give peace of mind to people that are intending to take the next cruise, and ensure that they will be in a very pleasant and safe environment. Next. So this leads to the next question, right? What about comfort, safety, and hygiene when we are designing? And I know others might be discussing this a little bit more. I am just touching about briefly that some of the things that we do as designers and architects, engineers, and planners are now taken again to the next level. The surface that we use, that we specify for buildings, now have to consider much more issues of safety and hygiene that we used a few moments ago, right? A few months ago. The building systems have to be improved for air quality. And those of us who have been involved in LEED and sustainability and well for some time have been already pushing for some ideas that bring the nature back to the building, like this concept of cross ventilation. And now in these buildings, in these new facilities or in the retrofitting, we see a very big push again to take LEED, to take wellness to the next level, because the safety of the occupants becomes a number one priority in all of these buildings. So, you know, easy cleanable furniture and surfaces, and this has to permeate the design decisions, sometimes how we lay out spaces, or we space tables in a restaurant, or we determine boundaries within an existing space. And so this leads me to what are the implications to the existing space in itself, right? And like I said, we are seeing that now we have to think about testing, screening, and waiting areas in existing buildings, large-scale buildings that deal with thousands and thousands of occupants, and providing holding spaces and incorporate all our different devices that will actually push the limits of touchless, be it doors, be it checking facilities or other equipment, so that we really limit the amount of personal contact to surfaces when we can. And like we mentioned before, maybe instrumenting or implementing staggered use, and this will help, like we've seen in restaurants, when we decrease the occupant load, but we also see it happening in office buildings around the world. So once you've done this, you know, and you consider these 4 or 5 questions, and the conversations that we're having with our clients is like, that's great. We now have a great design, but I don't necessarily have the money to implement this. And so how do we do this? How do we help our clients offering solutions that might be implemented in short, medium, or long term? And the idea of phasing and the concept of phasing for implemented this engaging and you know, large questions that we have to address to create healthier environments is of utmost importance, because many of our clients, not only in the cruise industry, but also restaurant, hospitalities, and so forth, has been so affected that actually they have limited funds to implement anything. So in the first stage, we have to help them to implement those things that are unavoidable, so that they can start working and start generating revenue, and then think about other solutions that might be more demanding of space and more costly in terms of alternatives that we have to implement, but those can be done at a longer term. And so these are things that we are actively working with at the moment, with ports, with the cruise lines, when we are designing destinations in the Caribbean, and also in the cruise terminals. What are the things, they ask me, Gustavo, what are the things that we need to do right now that we cannot operate because the CDC is going to close us down. And then there's a lot of bells and whistles that we can think about doing as the cruise industry comes back, as we have more money, and maybe in a year or two, would be much easier to have those kinds of conversations. So that's my brief take on these things, seeing it from the architecture and design side. And again, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gustavo. There's a lot of good comments and some people saying thank you for the perspective. It's definitely one of the harder hit industries. So it's great to hear your insight. Thank you so much. So next we're going to move on to Jessica Chen, who I've had the privilege of working with for a long time, and she's fantastic. Jessica is going to share a little bit from the construction perspective. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the board. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Gus, and Stephen and Jeff as well. I wanted to start, if you're not familiar with us, Suffolk Construction is a national construction firm. We were established in 1982. We have 10 offices nationwide, with 4 of them being right here in Florida. We're fortunate enough to have a very diverse portfolio with experience in nearly every industry sector. And so these are 4 projects where I had the fortune of participating. And one of them is University of Miami Sustain Building. Miami-Dade College's Wolfson campus, Plumosa School of the Arts, and Plumosa School of the Arts addition. The last two, actually the Plumosa School of the Arts, we built and we're back on campus now adding middle school. This is the new addition that we're referring to. So some of the things that both Gus and Jeff and Stephen shared with us were some of the things that were necessary and some of the things that affected our industry. What we did in response to COVID-19 is that on the job sites, we immediately started doing temperature checks, additional PPE, of course, the masks, the gloves, additional sanitation stations, the health and safety signage. You see two examples there in English and Spanish, given our cultures down here. We also went ahead and really took time to stop the in-person meetings. We started doing more of these Zoom and Teams meetings. If we had to have meetings on site that were all out in the project, not in our trailer. And why were we doing these things? Specifically to address the problems that Jeff and Stephen talked about, the loss of manpower. We knew that if we made our environment safer, it would promote not only staying open, preventing outbreaks, but we actually experienced more manpower during lockdown times. We were fortunate enough to continue working. And the project that I was overseeing, Doral Sanctuary, instead of shutting down or seeing less manpower, we actually had more manpower because other job sites were shutting down and people felt safer in ours. So we actually had a bit of a spike with respect to manpower on our job site. Why are these things very important to us? And it affects design. It's the ultimate delivery, right? We design, we build, and then we deliver to the client. You have to take these budget considerations. When this started, none of us had an idea of how much it would take. And as mentioned before, this is something that we're going to have to consider for a bit longer. What we saw in the short-term impacts for the education side was the very first thing, adapting to address distance learning for both teachers and students, accommodating the safe return of students and staff. We saw a lot of temporary partitions, as well as more open drop-off stations, classroom modifications, and then there's the drive for HVAC improvements. For the future, what we're starting to see is the drive towards more flexible learning spaces so that instead of traditional classrooms, now we have the ability to expand classrooms simply by putting more partitions, movable partitions, and more collaborative spaces, believe it or not. Expanded health and wellness facilities to make sure that anyone not feeling well quickly is addressed. And also something else that we found interesting is that from 2014 to 2018, the national birth rates went down. And the thought is that throughout the rest of the country, perhaps we'll need smaller spaces rather than larger spaces, especially for education over the years. However, what we're experiencing in Florida is, even though our birth rates also decreased, with COVID, more and more people actually started relocating to South Florida because of our weather, and especially from the Northeast. So we don't think it'll really impact our education facilities with respect to size. Some of the things that looking forward is definitely the air quality considerations, the number of air changes, just improving the overall system. The filters are now different. And as Gus had mentioned earlier, those that have been practicing LEED requirements, that just comes along with it, right? IT solutions as well now have to accommodate hybrid learning for those instances, which unfortunately we're beginning to see, especially in the Northeast, as we're having more and more cases now that we're entering the fall and the winter. So we have to now accommodate that as well. And simple things that are already in existence, but perhaps we didn't apply them in public schools, touchless faucets, toilet systems, automated light systems, right? There's also been a drive towards indirect UV lighting to assist with viruses, and automatic doors. Again, all towards the idea of less contact with surfaces to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And with that, thank you so much. Thank you for all the presenters and the board. Keep calm and wash your hands.
Thank you, Jessica. That was great. And starting to see, I think, a lot of commonalities between sectors. They certainly each have their nuances, but a lot of commonalities. So thank you so much, Jess. All right, so we are going to move next to Robert. Robert, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm really excited to be here because I think it's this very type of thing. You know, we're big on the collaborative spirit here in our office, and of course, you know, the idea behind this is to gain inspiration from what everybody has to say. I've been fortunate enough to be part of this firm since 1996, and we're quite heavily focused on healthcare design. But the real blessing has been that our practice is quite varied as well. Next slide. So I'm going to focus a little bit, and again, you'll see commonalities in what, you know, Gus has had to say and Jessica's had to say, and some of those themes, you know, hold true for everybody. It's just, as Gus said, you know, taking those things we already do to the next level. So I'm going to try to focus on how COVID-19 has impacted some of our designs in the healthcare industry, how it's influenced, you know, architecture overall, and how these lessons learned from each area can inspire new thinking. Next slide. You know, we gain inspiration and this idea about creating safe spaces from the most unlikely areas of our work. Sometimes, you know, people think they look at images like this, and we've been fortunate enough to do several award-winning parks. You know, and safety is always such a big part of that discussion, and things you've never considered. Just, you know, get involved in the design of a park and talk to the parks and recreation directors, and you'll hear a lot of interesting things that you have to sort of design around for parks. But it's about safe spaces. Next slide. And again, you know, it's really about let's look at the really diverse part of our practice. It's what we do. You know, so, some drastically different examples there: Jupiter Medical Center on the left, and the Town of Palm Beach Recreation Center on the right. Both are spaces that promote wellness and well-being and serve the community, but in drastically different ways. But I think, you know, what we've seen is that each effort, each approach to these designs can draw upon the other. Next slide. And again, as Gus said, these are concepts and technology that we've already used, you know, in either an education facility that you see there on the left, or a library like the example on the right. You know, it's how we keep people and families and children safe in these spaces. Next slide. So the obvious jumping off point is healthcare design and the typical patient space. But again, it's what can we gain from that? It's the use of the materials. It's really thinking about how, you know, contaminants are collected within these spaces and how to eliminate that. You know, where are all the joints, where are all the seams, implementing the use of those, you know, really sanitary, cleanable materials in a really effective way, and when done well, you know, in a really attractive way. Next slide. And so what we try to draw on is looking at the different sectors of our work, and when done well, what does each do well? And what does healthcare design do well when you enter a really nice healthcare facility? Wayfinding is always a big part of that. And what we found is these are the things that influence not only, you know, they don't create safe spaces, but they also influence safe behavior. You know, knowing where to be in the facility can be such a strong reinforcement. You know, it's that separation of the staff, the visitors, the patients, and each flow of traffic and supplies even, you know, has its own designated area of a facility like this. And that in itself, when done well, creates safety, security, infection control. And, you know, in healthcare design, there's always this use of restricted zones in the clinical areas that really reinforces that safety. Next slide. One thing we've also seen is this different thinking about, you know, the way we organize these spaces. This is an example of a fairly typical ICU, but what makes this quite usable for Wellington in the age of COVID is instead of adding on to their existing ICU, when we did this unit, it's a separate ICU. So they're able to have different sides of their ICU. And this unit in particular served as their COVID ICU during the height of some of their, when some of that spiked in their community. Next slide. So again, I think it's not what we learn from the highly technical spaces like the hybrid OR you see on the left there. Although again, those ideas of infection control and the way we use the materials in those spaces are exemplified in that. It's the simpler things that healthcare does well. It's where do you put the PPE stations, the hand washing stations, are they touchless? We're starting to see that influence other sectors of our work. Next slide. I also like to draw on personal experience. A lot of us have families, and how this has impacted what we do. My kids have been in bands, so you can see that lonely trumpet sitting on the stand. That's kind of how we're feeling right about now. Next slide. So we've gone from this idea of the kids aren't able to do what they normally do. And do we want to live with this? The slide on the right, or on the right with the child kind of playing through a mask and having a sort of a piece of cloth wrapped over the bell of our instrument. Can we do things to counteract that and create a safe space for things to get back to normal? Next slide. And I think we can, and it's those things in healthcare that I mentioned earlier, that separation of circulation. But also, I was very fortunate to see a presentation that some of my engineering collaborators gave recently, and they had this really great idea about HVAC systems and how we again take that to the next level and do the things that we're supposed to do, but do it better. But then we can really change the behavior of the people that operate these buildings. One example was the idea of flushing out the space. That this practice of saving energy really has to stop, although it's very attractive here in Florida. We can't shut our buildings down on the weekends or at night. We have to think about cycling those systems on before occupancy in the morning and flushing the space, and at the end of the day too, and that can have a huge impact on the indoor air quality. Next slide. And again, it's easy to say, and you've heard this a lot, encourage the use of outdoor spaces, and that's nice in other parts of the country, and when it's pleasant here, that's something we can do, and we've just all designed buildings that sort of engage the outdoors and really welcome people outdoors, but that's not always a reality here, as we've sort of just come off another week of rain every day. Next slide. And when we look at the office environment, I don't think this is something we want to go to. It's like a workspace should not feel like a prison. Next slide. We don't all have the luxury of just being able to sort of reduce the density of our offices to 50%. I think we just have to think about all these other things that are already in our toolkit and take it all to the next level. And of course, that comes with a cost, but it's that discussion with our clients that has to be had. Next slide. In researching this presentation, I was kind of inspired because I've heard this said a lot lately. These are not new ideas, and we can look to history, to how history dealt with certain situations. And one of the things is I've always been inspired by 30s modernism, and those architects always inspired my work. But Alvar Aalto, when looking at this sanatorium, revolutionized the idea of how those patients were handled and exposure to outdoor. Next slide. And that kind of set off this wave of the idea of the use of those materials. They're inherently cleanable, they're inherently sanitary. And we even see that influence in the design of offices today, as you can see there on the right. Next slide. When you go back to healthcare, it's interesting to see, again, we draw a lot in this idea of the cross-pollination of our different design efforts. Just in the same way, you kind of see in this space how much the hospitality industry has influenced healthcare design. So in these nicer spaces, and it often is exemplified in sort of concierge suites, and in particular labor and delivery suites, where really it is sort of you're trying to pull in a certain market. Healthcare or hospitality has influenced healthcare in that way. And we've learned a lot of lessons from hospitality design. Next slide. And the other thing that we've learned is too, it's and you've all heard this talked about ad nauseum, the idea of open plan architecture. I think we've gotten back to a little bit more of a traditional approach. Activities and different groups of people can be segregated a little more effectively if we don't just blow open the space in these buildings. Next slide. It's this separation of function, different age groups in different spaces that we're probably going to see a little bit more of now. Next slide. The other way, again, I'm very fortunate to be involved in the fire station design for our firm as well. And this idea of zones kind of plays out in an interesting way there. And again, it's really great to serve that clientele. And in this case, it was Palm Beach County Fire Rescue. And when they came to us and said, hey, we really have this issue with carcinogens in the workplace for our firefighters. We really need to do something about that. And this is not unique to our firm. There's lots of firms that do this well. But this idea about creating the intermediate zone between, the hot zone on the right, which is where all the contaminants are, where all where they come back from calls on the fire trucks, and allowing this intermediate space before you get to the house on the left for decontamination and removal of gear, and in a lot of cases, showering and the laundry facilities are right there in the middle. It just really separates the house aspect of a fire station, which is really a unique architectural exercise. It's combination house and utility, but it's really been effective in creating a healthier environment for the firefighters. Next slide. And the other thing about public buildings like fire stations that serve dual purposes is they have clear separation of entrances. There's a clear path that the public might approach this building and a very limited amount of space that separates them from the firefighters and where they work and operate. And I think we're going to see more of that. Next slide. So that's all I have for this evening. And again, I thank you so much, and I really feel fortunate to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
Robert, thank you. That was great. And I think especially interesting to hear from a healthcare perspective how, we're starting to think about that as an industry too, as they've had to adapt on the fly this entire year. So definitely was great to hear from you. Thank you. Just a reminder to everybody too, feel free to enter your questions as we kind of go along here, and then we'll also circle back to any questions at the end of the program, but feel free to use that chat function. And with that, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good evening. Thank you so much to AEC Trendsetters and the board for inviting me for this very informative panel this evening. I'm so impressed with all the speakers and so proud to be a part of this panel. As I said in the opening, I am the owner of the Wesley Group, which is a contract project management firm. So our firm manages and oversees major hotel renovation and construction projects, typically on branded hotels. So what happens is a property receives a property improvement plan, or a PIP, from the brands upon a sale or a change of ownership, or in some cases they have a cycle renovation, which is where the brand requires the property owner to renovate as part of their licensing agreement. So every so many years, like in the case of Focus Service, it's 7 years, a hotel is required to renovate. That's what makes a Courtyard Marriott look like a Courtyard Marriott, and so forth. So my firm works with owners and brands to contract a design firm, and in some cases that includes engineers and architects. We determine scope, we procure FF&E, and coordinate warehousing logistics, sign up a general contractor, and implement through final owner and brand sign off. So in addition, we manage major capital engineering replacement projects like HVAC replacement, boiler systems, fire life safety upgrades, elevator modernizations, etc. I have a general contractor friend that would say doghouse or penthouse, it's all built the same way, starts with the plan and ends with 4 walls and a roof. So we manage a lot of different types of projects in that respect. Some of you might think, well, project management, why would I need to hire someone for that? Can't I just do it myself? So I guess I'll explain using my best industry analogy that I can think of, one that's probably gotten attention for a lot of other reasons lately, but it's kind of like building a wall. An owner can gather all the elements like bricks and rebar. They can get the equipment that they need to move the dirt and clear the way, but who's going to make sure the process is completed in the correct order? Who's going to make sure the foundation is set at a level area? Who's going to make sure that it's plumb and in line? And who will be the concrete that keeps the whole wall together? Because without that concrete, your wall is just a pile of bricks and dirt. And project management cements that whole process together. So the owner hires the designer, architects, engineers, a lot like some of our panelists we have here today, to do their excellent work. and they focus on their one particular area of the project, and the owner hires project management to keep an eye on the big picture to make sure that when the subcontractors come in, everyone works on a schedule to complete on time and on budget. So I've also had the good fortune to be elected by the citizens of West Palm Beach to serve as city commissioner for District 1 for almost 3 years. When I went into public service, I defined a city based upon people, and I was elected to serve people, and really thought my professional career and my public service position would be separate places in my life. And it's very true that a city is very much about people, but beyond managing people, a city is about a series of roads, buildings, infrastructure, all things that need to be built, maintained, and planned for, which is very much what we all do professionally. So it's been really incredible to see how useful my construction background has been in public service to be able to advise on things like policies of retrofitting 1970s high rises with sprinkler systems, and making sure that in that process, our policy addresses what the supply is from the street to make sure that the pressure can get up the stack. So many, many times having that expertise has really helped to improve on our policy making. So being a business that's primarily in hospitality, we were one of the hardest hit industries when COVID hit, and what felt like an overnight turn beginning the first week of March 2020, my hotel clients immediately halted their capital projects. Most capital projects in hotels are funded out of reserves, where a percentage of revenues are escrowed into an account to reinvest in the capital structure. And with historic single digit occupancies, hotel owners hit the brakes, and they hit them really hard. So my year set with several renovation projects suddenly halted to a number of 0. And fortunately had some projects that were completing because they were mid-construction, but that sudden change no one could have predicted, and left me reevaluating the future of my business model, like a lot of us had to. And I think the key to all things in life is how quickly can we adjust to change, and COVID is no different. We've seen the ingenuity of many industries, and ours is no different, as we've seen some of those common themes this evening throughout our presenters. Years ago, I read an article in the Palm Beach County EOC did a planning exercise of the scenario of an impending zombie apocalypse. And how could we fortify when we knew they were coming? What did we do once we knew they were getting here? And how could we survive and recover in the aftermath? And while it seems really silly, the point was that all disasters have common elements of how they can be planned for and how they can be handled. We were so used to looking at hurricanes as a disaster that we were looking at the same plans, and having this different perspective allowed us to step out of the box and look at a familiar problem with a different lens and generate new ideas. So in that same way, I think here in South Florida, we're all familiar with weathering storms, so we can examine our business models throughout that lens. And in preparing and weathering the storm of COVID, we're doing constant monitoring and adjusting. In the same way we watch Jim Cantore and the spaghetti models with a watchful eye, we look to the indicators in our local markets to look for much larger global trends. I sit on the board of the Palm Beach County Tourism Development, which is the agency that helps direct bed tax dollars and where they're collected and spent. And the heads of major hotels like the Breakers and PGA National, the Boca Resort, all represent the hospitality industry and help advise and direct these resources. When COVID hit, this agency reacted, and they redirected drastically, reducing budgets, and during the shutdown, they were reevaluating what their model was on how to spend marketing dollars once the economy reopened to attract tourists to a newly opened and safe Palm Beach County. And their strategies have really paid off. The conservative estimates of bed tax collections have been exceeded month over month, meaning that we shifted our model and found a different way to still succeed despite COVID. And that's not to say that the industry is back to normal by any sense, but it's a good barometer for where we're going. I think in a hurricane, we'd all be calling friends and family to check in and see how they're doing. And the same is true in the professional network. And those relationships become more and more valuable. I spend at least one day a week combing through my contact list to see who I haven't spoken to in a while. I send them an email or a LinkedIn note to check in, and it helps to maintain that subject matter expertise, whether it's checking in with Moen and learning about what their latest initiatives are, and touchless faucets, or interface carpet, where I'm learning about their antimicrobial coatings. You become the subject matter expert, and at that same time, it allows for networking to reach out and say, what's a project that we can work on together. So those opportunities start to look a bit different, where models have now shifted away from active construction in the project management sector to more buyer focused, specifically in hospitality, as assets become somewhat financially strained from time to time. There is a new emerging market of being able to provide buyer and seller services, so that in that case of change of ownership and PIP, that the Wesley Group in particular provides management services for that renovation planning process. So COVID has a bit of an artificial opportunity to slow down and work on those things that have been important, but have become really critical in emergencies to get the strength of that network, which is the key to survival. While we're not out of this COVID storm, we have enough time under our belts to understand the way in which the wind is blowing and what we might be able to do differently to fortify for the future. So how can we diversify? What kind of shutters and impact windows can we install to make the next storm or continued storm not as damaging? In those network reach out calls, I've found, for instance, while renovation construction and new assets for the hotel industry are not where the market lies, there is a significant market still within the remediation business. So, for example, as we go through the winter season, many fire sprinkler system pipe bursts occur from unmaintained lines that freeze, and they sometimes flood and destroy corridors and rooms. And these rooms are out of order and precious revenue is lost for every day. So I found that with clients, having those relationships to be able to get them upgraded to the latest and greatest distancing measures or safety measures, or even something as simple as having that local vendor as our global distribution is somewhat disrupted during this COVID time. If I can call up Columbus, Mississippi and be able to get a couple of dressers from a case goods manufacturer rather than waiting 6 to 8 weeks lead time to have something arrive from overseas, that's a value add to my client to allow them to get back up in operation and allow that disruption to be less impactful. So I find that, businesses using services and using project management services as subject matter experts, I think strengthens the whole model. But, all in all, I think COVID is not the first or the last storm. With any luck, it will be the strongest storm that any of us see in a long time. But one thing is for sure, we're very resilient as an industry. We're not dinosaurs. We will adjust. And our biggest strength is to lean on each other and learn from each other. I have learned so much from all the panelists here this evening. And I think that's really where these opportunities exist, is to use industry leaders like AEC Trendsetters and really take a look at how we can both maximize and utilize the strength of our network. So thank you again for the opportunity this evening. And I look forward to learning even more.
Kelly, thank you. That was great, and definitely appreciate your positive attitude and finding the silver linings and some creative ways to kind of tackle some of the challenges that I think every business, every industry is facing. So that was great. Thank you. We have one question from Ted, specific to you, Kelly, if I could ask you. Ted asks, when the industry rebounds, and it will, do you anticipate those projects to be slow but steady, or perhaps an overwhelming push for new projects?
So that's a really great question, because I think as we look at the industry, we've seen some indicators that it's about to pick up again. The brands in particular have been planning for this exercise, and I think that there will be projects coming up, and there's an interesting opportunity, I think, for people within the industry like ourselves, in that many hotel owners specifically that would have had full-time staff to be designers, to be architects, had to let go of that staff during this downturn because they couldn't afford to keep them on staff. So it creates an opportunity for a third-party engineer, for a third-party architect to step into that space, because the brands are going to require that renovation. All those things that were put on hold are going to come back up as requirements. So it does create a unique need. I think that the brands in particular were the ones that will drive the deadline. They will start to space it out, but that still doesn't preclude the fact that there will be ownership companies across the country and internationally that will come due, so that was only put on pause. It wasn't stopped. And so they will come back. And I think it will come back within a wave as those deadlines come up, but really unique opportunities. That's a great question.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, Ted, for the question. All right, so we're going to move on to our final speaker tonight, and then we'll circle back to some general questions that we've gotten as well. Brittany, I'll turn it over. Oh, and Brittany, let me unmute you. Hold on, I think you're still muted. Wouldn't be a Zoom call without that.
Ah, wonderful. Well, thank you. My name is Brittany. Thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful experience so far this evening. So you can go ahead and go to the first slide or the next slide. So as COVID hit the country earlier this year, I think a lot of design firms really took pause and thinking of different ways that they need to work now and deliver. We've heard this from pretty much everyone on the panel this evening, but there was really a fever to get ahead of the curve, so to speak, and get the white papers out, be the thought leaders, really ease our clients' minds that we know how to help in this situation. And I think that resulted in a lot of time that we, as designers, spent researching different products and materials and trends throughout the country and across markets. So, you know, using our clients, talking to end users, really figuring out ways that we could use design to influence change and ease anxiety during this time and naturally spark social distancing. I think Robert mentioned that a little bit too in his talk. But ultimately just dreaming of environments that are ideal, not just during the pandemic, but going forward as this continues or into the future. And I think this pause really several concepts really started to emerge that are pretty consistent across all markets. Next slide. So thankfully, technology was already in place for the most part for all of us to continue working through, learning, socializing through quarantine. Zoom, Teams, FaceTime, they're not new technologies, but our reliance on them for our daily lives has really come into play here. And from that, I think we're seeing what we're calling Zoom rooms have come out. Yeah, we had huddle rooms and conference rooms and that kind of thing, but now we have spaces in our homes, in our living rooms that are now designated as our virtual meeting space. Oh, can you go back one second? I think you skipped ahead a little. Thank you. You know, now everything from learning to happy hours is happening virtually. So having a space that's dedicated in your environment, whether it be in your office, in your hotel, or in your classroom, that you have adequate lighting, sound, technology set up for these meetings has really become a necessity in our lives. And as we all know, having a distraction-free virtual meeting is virtually impossible when you have a shared space. So being able to have a dedicated area is becoming more and more prevalent in our spaces. And as people start to transition from their home quarantine back into their work, play, live lives, you know, elements of home are really help ease anxiety and stress. OFS had a campaign about a year ago that was called Home Like, and it really focused on this. And so it's not necessarily a new trend, but I think coming out of 2020, it's becoming very prevalent because having furniture and materials and shapes and that remind us of home really help us feel a sense of security and comfort. It also has, you know, brings some nostalgia and that family feeling. It helps us feel calm in our spaces, which is great. Another element of Home Like is just having a variety of spaces and types of seating, types of environments. I don't know about you, but when I'm at home, working from home, I'll be on my couch, at my desk, at my kitchen counter, you know, outside, wherever I can be. So having a lot of variety in sit to stand, task to lounge, casual to formal is really, again, has that connection to home, which makes people feel very comfortable. I think places like WeWork will continue to really be prevalent and really gain popularity as people are coming out of quarantine and feeling that need for community, but still want to feel that security from home. And those spaces spaces, but also, you know, having a place that you can have, also having areas that are less enclosed, that you can have more open and flexible collaboration areas is also coming out of this, similar to a co-working setup. I think we touched on the Zoom rooms, you know, places where you can have that distraction-free working environment, but still having the larger conference rooms. While yes, they have social distancing challenges right now, I don't see those really going away. But ultimately, the physical office is starting to be more of, you know, just that touch-in point, that place for groups to come to, you know, small groups to come together to collaborate versus their permanent work location. Next slide. Another thing, and I think Kelly talked about this really great, wonderfully, is that, you know, we've really seen in 2020 how resilient we are and how we can adapt. And so again, not a new concept, but talking about how the spaces that we are using really need to be super flexible. So having a space that can be adapt to our needs is so key. Whether that's your home gym that's now your office, or your living room that's a classroom, your restaurant that's a meeting space, you know, we've all had to kind of adjust on the fly this year, which is great. I think it's really shown that we can do that, and it's come up with some really ingenious ways to use the spaces, which has been really inspiring. I think this is really especially important in school environments where a single classroom may end up being a performing arts room. It may be a cafeteria, a media center, a music room, to quarantine a small group of kids that maybe don't have the opportunity or the resources to do a remote learning situation. So, you know, I think we're going to see some more of that going into the future. Next slide. And Robert touched on this one as well. We've kind of all touched on everybody's stuff, which is really cool. But the indoor-outdoor spaces, while it is a challenge here in Florida, I think, you know, seeing spaces really opening up help provide that social distancing that, you know, when people feel like you're less space around them, you have more anxiety. So as space physically opens up, you have that infinite bubble. It gives you a little bit more calm, a little bit more security. So spaces like meeting rooms and lobbies and classrooms that are traditionally more enclosed, seeing kind of an inch towards making them a little bit more open for that physical connection to outside. And beyond just the social distancing aspect, having a connection either physically, literally implied, has benefits for physical and mental well-being. So natural elements for lighting, water, planting, materials, patterns, it has a calming effect on occupants of a space. So, and keeping physical and mental health in mind while designing is going to be more important than ever coming out of this year. So implementing some natural elements in the design is just an easy way to really do that. And I think also as people are transitioning out of their homes, they're craving that connection to nature. So you're not sitting next to your dining room window anymore all day long, or you're not walking your dog at lunch, you know. So having some of those natural elements in the space also has that connection to nature, but it's still triggering back to your home space as well. As far as color trends, we're seeing some that do have tiebacks to the biophilia. And this first one here is, you know, having some warm, cozy earth tones with some wood elements in there really invoke a homey and comfortable feeling, and tying into some of the Scandinavian trends that we've been seeing of late, and just kind of invoking that comfort that they inspire. Another element of biophilia is just pattern and color and sensory elements. And so, this year, I think bold colors and patterns are really exciting as well. So they just are fun and creative, and they have so much energy. And I think, again, as coming out of quarantine, people are just craving that. So it's just fun. So the next slide, and just to kind of wrap all this up together, I think Gus mentioned a little bit on this too, but you know, over the last several years, we've all been seeing LEED and the sustainability and the energy component. I think now we're going to start to see a little bit of a shift towards the WELL certification that really focuses on occupants and their well-being. You know, connections to natural light and ventilation and views and movement and materials are all parts of this certification and things that we're looking at when we're going through the process. And I think COVID's really brought these things to the forefront as we've gone through all of this. And, you know, taking care of ourselves and each other is not something that's going away. I think that's going to be now ingrained in our society, which is wonderful, you know, and WELL really gives clients a qualitative, quantitative way to measure those things to help the well-being or the peace of mind of their occupants, which is really wonderful. And that's it for me. Thank you again for having me this evening. It's wonderful.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. That was great. I think we're obviously all spending so much more time in the spaces that we live in, and some of us where we work too. So I think seeing your perspective of how those trends are you know, sort of changing through this entire pandemic is great to hear. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. So thank you again to all our speakers. I'm going to circle back to a couple questions if I could. I know we have a few minutes before we wrap up. Christina, who is actually our board president. Hi, Christina. She's entered a question about estimated costs for implementing temperature checks and PPE and some of the protocols that as an industry we've all had to kind of adapt and implement on the fly this year. Her question is specifically around how those costs are perhaps able to be passed on to a client. Are we absorbing those as companies? Does anybody have any thoughts on how you've been handling that?
So it really depends on the client and the project and where you are in the project. What we're doing now in projects we're just starting, we're putting estimates together. We already have an idea of how much it's going to cost. So we go ahead and show that to the client so that they understand, and they do, that this is something necessary. And the cost per hour can go as high as $56 an hour if you're using a nurse or nurse practitioner. And then it can go as low as minimum wage, depending on who's taking the temperature. Early on, we did go to the route of the higher costs, but what we found is we finally were able to get our hands on temperature guns. And just like many of the restaurants do today, we'll have somebody at a lower wage to be able to take those temperatures.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Anyone else have perspective on that question?
Sure. On the operations side, we budget about like $1 per guest for everything, because obviously we're providing our team members with masks and gloves and all these different things and that are kind of coming up. So again, just an average, just pre-COVID, you know, we would do an amenity cost for, say, like bread service per guest. Now we have our PPE operating expense, and again, roughly about $1 per guest that comes through the building. So, or each one of the venues in regards to the project that we're working on right now. So as far as budgeting pro forma and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you, Stephen.
Welcome.
We have one question for Gustavo. I think you may have seen it, Gustavo, but I'll read it for everybody else. Working on cruise terminals, were there any new design changes that you were actually excited to implement? Something that the cruise lines should have done a long time ago, but now have the chance to do?
That's a great question. I love it. Because, you know, what happened, those of you who have taken a cruise, you've experienced this, that you know, anybody inside that building is either taking a trip, right, going in the vacation, or working. There's no, you cannot go there with your mother and family just to say goodbye, right? Everybody there is either in the operation side or a passenger. So what happened is that in all of these cruise terminals, the first space that inside the building is this screening space, right? Where you come in and you're screened, and it's like a lot of people packed, and maybe up to 600 passengers packed in a tight environment before they can pass and then go to the check-in or so. So now with this COVID-19 environment, obviously that cannot happen anymore. And so it provides us an opportunity to design something we've been advocating for some time, where we're telling the ports and the cruise lines, listen, that first moment is as important as the last one when you go home. It's what they remember. You know, they've been anticipating, some people, for months this vacation. So you want them, when they finally get to the building, that has to be a very pleasant environment. And so now with COVID, not only we have decreased the amount of controls when you come in, but also the environment that we're designing is really towards having the next level of guest experience. And so this has accelerated that trend, actually. That's a great question. I love it. Thank you.
We also got a question, Jeff and Stephen, this is directed to you, and Gustavo, you may actually have some perspective on this as well. But do we think the era of buffets and complimentary breakfasts are over in the hospitality industry?
I'd say there will be most likely diminished completely unless it's something spectacular in the future or whatever. But I think buffets and that sort of thing, we're always hanging by a thread unless it was like a specific type of thing. I mean, yes, cruise lines obviously always did a great job with that. When I was in Las Vegas, same thing, you know, in a lavish sense, of course. But I think now, and probably for the years that are coming, I think people are going to be very averse to that, just because of it was one of the first things to go, and it was almost used as like a catalyst for exactly what not to do as far as like serving. So I'd say if at all, it'll be years down the line before that really has a comeback, in my opinion. But
yes, I'll second that, because what we've seen in the first cruise lines, cruise ships that have been retrofitted after post-COVID, is that they have eliminated the buffet, actually. And those restaurants, those spaces have been now laid out in a much more, much more like the restaurants that we're seeing today, with social distance and served to the table and that kind of environment. So the buffet, unfortunately, because I'd enjoyed it when I was, especially if you go with kids on a ship, but they're gone.
If I could chime in on this too, from a hospitality perspective, because I think this is really key, especially the focus service industry in hospitality, because the complimentary breakfast at something like a Residence Inn or one of those focus service hotels is something that's really key, and something that the brands have focused on very squarely over the past several years, even getting to the point where the Hampton Inn over the last couple of years implemented a brand new breakfast phase 2 to have their entire area set up. So I think you're going to see a lot of rollouts, and the brands have been preparing what that's going to look like in the new era, because it has been a huge amenity. And so if that amenity doesn't exist in the buffet style, how does that amenity exist? And so I think you'll see a new iteration of what that looks like, because I think that's something still that, from a hospitality perspective, guests still demand. It's just going to look differently.
Great points. So I think we have time for one more question here. And selfishly, this is my question. I think we got through all of the attendee questions though, but please feel free to send in any others if you have them. I think, this pandemic has certainly forced all of us to kind of go about our day-to-day lives a little more creatively than we may have used to have done. So what are some of the best practices, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, that maybe you hadn't done previously that you're kind of excited about adopting going forward, that the pandemic has kind of forced you to think about differently?
Well, I'll jump in with one. Who would have said that our office and staff will be working remotely, and remotely so well? And boy, I was against that kind of flexibility until the pandemic. And I'm so happy, especially for the young architects, they can work from home, we can meet occasionally physically. And I'm very excited about this new environment, because it is working very well.
Completely agree. And I think for our industry in construction, it's a little different with our teams out in the field, but even with the team fields, and Jessica can probably speak to this, we found creative ways to, be connecting with each other a little bit differently. And it's been great to see. So echo everything you said, Gustavo.
Thank you.
Agreed. For us, we still had to man the job, still had to visit, but definitely communicating with our other teams, with our head office, became completely Microsoft Teams. And for a bit of a time, I was able to work from home, and Gus, I loved it too, except that I found myself overworking. So the moment I woke up until the moment I was about to go to sleep, well, there was nothing else to do. So I just continue feeling guilt, right? Oh, I'm working from home. So I just continue working. Believe it or not, returning to the workplace helped me detach a little and have a little sanity.
Yeah, for us, I
Which is
think it's
good.
been just this process of adaptation and really being flexible to what works best in each situation. Some of our team members work really great at home, so we've kind of got this whole hybrid approach to some people work from home, some people come in the office full time, some people come in the office part time, and we just had to think about the projects we're working on and what works best for our personalities on our team. The other kind of maybe a bright spot and negative spot simultaneously is in the healthcare architecture. All our projects are reviewed by the state of Florida. So it's almost like an extra permitting process. On the front end, we go in front of the state of Florida and you meet in offices anywhere from Orlando to Tampa to Miami. And now that's gone away. We do all that as virtual stand-up reviews, as they call them. And that's been a real plus. On the downside, those same teams typically come out to our projects at the close of the project and kind of certify them, if you will, for use as healthcare facilities. And that's really best done in person. And not being able to, and those staff members are all remote, and trying to do that over Zoom with webcams and people FaceTiming and showing the construction site, that's been a real challenge. So hopefully we'll be able to keep the good side of that and go back to normal on the other side.
Absolutely. Well, we are right about at 7 o'clock. So we want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time, but absolutely appreciate all of our speakers coming on tonight. It was great to hear from everybody and just hear a little bit about what's going on in everyone's world as we're kind of navigating this situation together. So on behalf of AEC Trendsetters and our board, thank you so much. For our attendees, thank you for jumping on, and we will be sending out the slides after tonight's event kind of wraps up. So please look forward to seeing those in your inbox, and we'll keep you all posted on our next event. Hopefully sooner than later, we're back in person, but we'll make this work in the meantime. So thank you all so much and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.